everyone, it's Karen here from the Stitch Sessions, and welcome to this week's tutorial, which is actually going to be a little bit more of a crochet lesson. Today I want to go through the 4 different types of ribbing that you can crochet. Now this is mostly focused on hats, and it's kind of appropriate because this year our crochet series for the year is called Hats Off, folks, where every month we're going to crochet a different hat project. And this little crochet lesson is going to come in handy for next week's tutorial, which you will see next week. Now, you can use this ribbing method for the borders of blankets, so feel free to use this method as well. I will talk a little bit about blanket edging as a little bonus at the end. But for the most part, if you're working on hats, you can use one of these 4 types of ribbing. If you guys have seen any other types other than the 4 I'm talking about, please do leave those in the comment box down below. So I'm going to take you through it step by step, and this way you'll have a great little resource tool. If you want to choose a different type of ribbing for a different type of hat, just simply click on this video and you will be reminded. So I would recommend you save this video in one of your favorite crochet playlists, and that way you'll have it as a reference tool every time you want to come back to it. So what do you say? Shall we get started working on our ribbings? Let's do it. Okay guys, so when we're working on things like hats, we're generally working either from the bottom up or from the top down. And I'm giving you guys a little sneak peek here as to our next hat project. Now this is a special case, but I'm just using it as a scenario. So you would either work it from the crown and then expand it and work your way down and then add the ribbing, or you would begin with the ribbing and then build your hat up, okay? Now in this case, I treated it like I did a top-down approach and did the ribbing afterwards. So you can see the little bit of that effect there. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first start talking about if you work a hat from the bottom, working our way up. And in this tutorial, I'm particularly focusing on beanie type hats. Okay. So the first example I'm going to show you is from the bottom up and how you can work your ribbing first and then build your hat on top of that. So you can see this is a little strip I have here, and there is a difference from my left side to my right side. Both of these are ribbings, and you can see it's the same on the front as it is in the back. What you'll notice is that on this side, the ribbing is much tighter in the sense that they sit closer together, although you still have a lot of stretch. And it's got really that knit-like effect that we all love to create with crochet. On this side, the ribbing is much further apart, so it's not as snugly together, and it still has a bit of stretch, but it's funny, this one seems to have a lot more stretch there. Now, the reason why these look different is because this side, I used slip stitches worked into the back loops only, and then on this side, I used single crochets worked into the back loops only. And so you can see, because a slip stitch is a much narrower, or I should say shallower stitch, it's going to create a tighter ribbing effect. And when you come here, because the single crochet sits a little taller, it's just going to give your ribs, we'll call them, a little bit more space in between. So, you know, they're both nice. It just all depends on what your preference is. And for me, I kind of like this tighter one, most especially when I work on mitten projects, because I find that they just give a nice tidy look. So you would work a strip, and I'll show you in just a moment. So you would work a strip across. Usually I chain anywhere between, you know, like 10 and 12 chains, depending on who you're making the hat for. And then I simply work my way across and back to create the strip that's going to give me the circumference that I'm looking for. So once you've completed the strip, you would then bring these 2 sides together, you would sew them up, and now you're ready. So now you've got your bottom band of your hat. So this is a tiny hat here. And then you would stitch around and then continue to build your rounds up this way. And this is what we call a bottom up approach. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how you would do that if you are a little newer and curious as to how to create your band first. Okay, so I'm just using this kind of rose-colored yarn here to show you. So, and by the way, I should have mentioned that, so I like using the tighter rib here for things like mittens. I would sometimes go the single crochet rib route for things like baby hats because they don't sit, this ribbing isn't as snug around the head, and I kind of like the loose effect of it. So just a little something to think about, okay? So if you're starting your ribbing for a hat, for example, or even if you're starting it for mittens, you would start with a slip knot on your hook, just like that. And like I said, I generally chain up 10, or actually I'll chain 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I add the extra one to give me some room to turn my work, okay? So it looks just like that. Now, this is what I would do on average for like a young adult to an adult, okay? If you're doing something like for a baby hat, sometimes I would do like anywhere between 6 and 8 chains. So it's totally up to you and depending on the size. So to do the slip stitch method, which is this one that sits a little tighter, all you're going to do is you're going to find the second chain from the hook. So you're going to skip the first one into the second one, and you're just going to insert your hook and simply do a slip stitch. Now this first row, and actually even the first 2 or 3 rows, you want to make sure that you stay somewhat relaxed. If you stitch too tightly here, you're going to have an issue trying to fit your hook into the stitches. So all you're going to do is you're simply going to go across to the end of the row, and you're going to slip stitch, and I keep it as relaxed as I can. And of course, depending on the yarn weight and the hook size, your band will vary in height for that reason, right? But I'm just using, on average, I use like a medium 4-weight yarn, and I tend to either use a 5.5 or a 6mm hook. And I find that generally that's a good size to go on. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end of my row here. So I have the last one, and now I have 10 chains, okay? So you have something that looks like this. It is very tight, okay? So the stitch ends up being very shallow. So every time you come up to the end of your row, you will always chain 1 and turn your work. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to continue working slip stitches, but we're going to go in through the back loops only. So remember that loop that's closest to you is the front loop, and the loop furthest away from you is the back loop. So I'm not going to work into that chain. I'm going to work into the very first stitch, and I'm just going to have to help it through there because these are shallow stitches. And then again, really nice and relaxed, I bring it through. Okay, and don't be afraid to kind of, turn your work in your hand so it makes it a little easier for you to see. So the next one, back loop only. There we go. I'm going to help it through. So that is what you continue doing all the way to the end. And this first 2-3 rows here always can be a little tricky because everything sits so shallow. Sometimes it's easy to mistake which row you're looking at, especially if you turn your work like this. Right now it's okay, but if you're looking at the back, sometimes it's hard to know where to place your hook. So just take your time and be patient, and you will get the hang of it. So I have to admit that this method can be a little tedious. This takes the longest part. So whenever you're working on mittens or a hat, this ribbing using the slip stitch method generally takes the longest because it's such a shallow stitch and it takes longer to work up. So it can be, I won't say frustrating because the result is awesome. It's just that it takes a while. Okay, so now I'm at the end here, and this is my turning chain here, so make sure you don't miss that. If you're ever uncertain, count your stitches, right? So if I counted and I only had 9, then I know I have to go and work that last stitch. So there's row number 2. And right now, it's just kind of like this thick little band here. It's hard to kind of figure out where things go. So once you kind of get to row number 3, then things start to work up a little bit. So we chain 1, we turn our work. See, this is where it can get tricky, like which is my front loop, which is my back loop. So always look at the V's that are closest to you and then go with those loops here, right? So you've got the front and the back, and that is where I insert. So like I said, you need a lot of patience for these first couple of rows. And then you just kind of get into a groove of doing it. And before you know it, you'll have this really pretty looking band and you will feel so proud of yourself. So this is actually one of my favorite ways to create a band. If I am working a hat or something, or mitts or something from the bottom up, which I don't know, I think most of the time I like this method best. Although if you look on the channel on a lot of the hat tutorials, I think I have a good variety of times that I did the bottom up versus the bottom versus the top down. So, okay. So now you can kind of see it starting to create its height. And now when I turn it here, now you can start differentiating that this is the last row. So this is what you would simply keep doing, and you would do it until you create the length, just like this one here, okay? And so you can see, even though it takes a while, it's so worth it. And look at how beautiful these edges come out. I really, really like this method for that. Your single crochet row edges also come out nice. And I'm going to show you right now, if you wanted to use a single crochet with the back loops only, which many like it because it's a lot faster. And it's just a point of preference. But so here's the single crochet method. So you're still going to chain 1, you're going to turn your work, and you're going to work into that back loop only. So let's pretend that that is a single crochet we're working into. The difference is that when you pull up a loop, you leave 2 loops, then you yarn over and single crochet. And that's basically it. But the thing that's in common with these 2 methods is that you're always working the back loops only, okay? But you can see already, hopefully, that the single crochet, see how much higher the single crochet sits than the slip stitch? So that is the main difference there, okay? Single crochet all the way across. And then you're going to do the same thing. Whoops, you're going to do the same thing you did with the slip stitch. When you get to the end, you will chain 1, turn your work, and go back where you came, and always go into the back loops only. Okay, so that's the how of how I created these 2 ribbings. Okay, and then of course, like I said, once you have your strip, then you would join, and whether you're doing a mitten or a hat, then you would build from the bottom going up. Okay, now let's talk about if you've built a hat from the top down and you want to create some ribbing. And this is where we're going to bring our friend in here, this purple yarn. So I've done a band here, so we're just going to pretend that this is a lot longer than it is. And I'm going to show you the 2 different methods that you can use using double crochet stitches. So in the other method, we used slip stitches and single crochets. In this method, we're going to use the double crochet. Now I'm going to bring this hat back on here because this was treated as a top down. And so I created the ribbing at the end, and you can see it just has a subtle texture. This is using double crochets and then front post double crochets. And I like this method a lot. It creates a nice, neat edge and a neat bottom round here. So let's talk about that. So we're going to pretend that this side here is the bottom of our hat. So you would begin by chaining 3 at the beginning. Okay. And then what we're going to do is in the very next stitch, instead of going into the stitch, we are going to work around this post here. See? The double crochet has a post. So you'll yarn over, go behind, pushing that post forward, and then you'll bring up a loop, and then you'll resolve like a regular double crochet. So you pull through 2 and pull through 2. So this chain 3 counts as a regular double crochet, and this one that we worked around the post is called a front post double crochet. And for the method that I used in that hat you just saw, I just used this method, which is alternating between a regular and a front post. So in the next stitch, so this is the post and this is the stitch sits to the right of it. I am just going to go into the stitch and double crochet. Okay, then the next stitch will get the post worked around. So instead of going here, I go behind the post and double crochet. Next one is into the stitch right there. And the next one is behind the post. So I think you get the gist, right? So you can see how it creates the ones that are the front post, just gives it a little bit of a raised effect, and it's just a much more subtle ribbing effect, and I love how it just blends nicely. So if this were the bottom of the hat, you can see how it's merging nicely here. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly finish this round, and I'm going to show you how I will meet up here and start a subsequent round. Okay, you'll need a few of these rounds to create that nice effect. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end of the round, and actually this is something interesting happened, which I'm glad because I can bring this up. So I forget how many stitches I did around, but I had an odd number of stitches. So what happened is I just did a front post, so the next one should be a regular stitch, but remember that chain 3 is also a regular stitch. So we're no longer in that alternating flow. Not the end of the world. I'm just going to work it as usual, because depending on the stitch you used for the hat portion, like the body, it may have needed an odd number of stitches. So, you know, it's not the end of the world. So all you're going to do is you're going to find the top of your chain 3, you're going to insert, and you will slip stitch to join. Okay, so it just means that here you're going to have 2 regular stitches back to back. So you can see, now you can see the ribbing taking effect. Now, I did also forget to mention that whatever pattern you use to create the body of your hat on the way down, I always begin by doing 1 row of regular double crochet stitches. So you'll need kind of a regular stitch in order to work the posts around. So as you saw, this row here below, just regular double crochets, and then I was able to kind of work around the posts as needed. Now that I've created this first row of ribbing, you can already see where the ribs are, and now you can just mimic the previous row, or the previous round, I should say. Now, how many rounds should I do for a brim or a cuff or something like that? In this scenario, this hat is actually an oversized hat. It's going to be for a toddler. It could actually be for a preteen. I made it kind of big. I did three rounds here, which I think is good enough. You might want to do 4. I generally will do 3 and then do a single crochet round just to give it a nice little finishing edge here. But anywhere between 3 and 4, I think is good, as always, depending on who you're making the hat for. Like maybe if this is a baby hat, I might only just do 1 more round, you know, so that is totally up to you. So what you would do is once you slip stitch, you chain 3 again. Okay, that counts as a regular. And now you just do what you see. So this first one here, I can see it was worked around the post. So guess what? We're going to work it around this post. So we just kind of go in behind there, work that double crochet. And now the next one, see how it sits a little bit further back? I'm going to work into that stitch. So now it's super easy because you just follow what you see. So there's a front post. And then this one is a regular stitch. Okay, and this one is a front post. And this one is a regular stitch. Okay, so now you can see, look at that. So it just creates that illusion that that rib is going to go as long as you'd like your brim to be. Yeah, so that is the method to just alternating your front posts. I'm going to just finish this round here, and then I'm going to go onto this side, and I'm going to show you how you can alternate front post and back post, which is also a popular method to creating a ribbing effect. So I'm just going to finish this side, and then I'll be just with you in a moment. Okay, so I finished 2 rounds of this ribbing and you can already see how it's taking shape. Okay, so I'm going to go to the other side and we're again going to pretend that this has been worked from the top down. So this is our bottom edge. We've already done 1 round of regular double crochets. And now we're going to work the method that is the alternating between front post and back post. So I'm going to kind of start in the similar spot where we began the other one. We're just going to pretend that this already was here. And I'm just slipping stitch to join. So 2 and 3, okay? So you would start your round with 3 double crochets. Now, into the next stitch, we're gonna do what we did in the previous example, and we're gonna work around the front post, just like that, okay? Now, instead of working into the stitch, we are gonna work around the back of the post. So in this example, we went in from the back to push the post forward. Well, we now want to go from the back to push the post to the back. Okay, so that's why it's called the back post. Then we bring it through. Whoops, I did not yarn over. How about that? So yarn over first, go in from behind, push around that post, and then we bring it up and double crochet as usual. Okay, so this is what we're alternating this time. We have a front post, so you can see where the double crochet looped around this post, bringing it to the front. Then we looped around the back post, so you can see that it's pushing it to the back, and you only see the little bar of the top of the stitch there. So that's what you're going to alternate. So in the next stitch, we're going to go back and do a front post. So we want to push the post to the front and double crochet. Okay, next one is a back post. So we would go in from behind and push that post back, okay? And that is the alternation. So again, next post, we push it to the front, double crochet, and the next one we go in from the back and push that post to the back, okay? So similar, right? But because these posts get pushed to the back, the grooves between the ribs are going to be deeper. And you'll see that as we do a subsequent row. Okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this round. Again, I'll meet up with you at the start of the next round to get you going. Okay, so again, I'm coming up to the end of this round and I've got 1 stitch left before I get to that chain 3. I've just done a front post, so the next one will be a back post, just like that. And again, this is because I had an odd number. If I had an even number of stitches, then I would finish on the front and this would be just like a regular stitch. It would mimic kind of the back post. So all I'm going to do again is find the top of the chain 3 and slip stitch to join. Okay, so if you look at the 2, it's a very subtle difference right now because I've only done 1 round, but if you really pay attention, you can see that these grooves are a little deeper than this one. And so I'm going to do another round so that you can see the more rounds you do of the posts, it will create a lot more deeper definition. So, you know, even in this one where I just alternated in the front posts only, you can see that it created more definition. So you would do the same thing as before. When you start the next round, you would chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. And now again, you just mimic what you see. So this first one is a front post. So I do front post. And then the second one is a back post. So I just go in through the back and do the same thing. So now I don't have to like really pay attention. I can just see what's in front of me. So I have a front post there. So I just mimic that front post. And then, oh, there's a back post there. So I go in from behind. Okay, and then again, front post. Now just from these few, you can now see that, see, the ribbing is looking much, much deeper. Now, I'm going to go ahead and finish round number 2 of this one and fasten off. And then I'm going to show you a main difference that you'll notice as well between these 2 types of ribbing. Because I know right now, kind of from afar, they look exactly the same. but I'll show you a little secret in just a moment. Okay, so I finished the second round here of my alternating post stitches. Okay, so you can see that it gets nicely extended. The ribbing is a little bit deeper, but again, like I said before, from afar, you might not be able to tell the difference. But I'm gonna tell you, this generally, just the alternating the front post with a regular stitch is my favorite. I'm gonna show you why. The stretch here is much more natural. When I go here, because we continually pull the stitch to the front and then to the back, the stretch is a bit stiffer, you see? So this one is softer. This one is stiffer. And you're thinking, well, what the heck is the difference? Well, if I turn this inside out, see, you can see here, this is where we did the alternate ribbing, right? So you can see ribs on the inside. Here, you don't necessarily see the ribs as much on the inside because I didn't do any back posts. Now, the benefit of this one is that if you want to turn your brim, it's always going to look the same on either side. Now, why it doesn't stretch as much is because when we work around the post here, it kind of stiffens the top of the stitch of each round. So when you're working that post, it's kind of pulling a little bit some of the fibers from the stitch on either side. So it's subtle, like it still has some stretch, but you can feel, like you can even see that there's a faint, what looks like a faint line. And it's basically, those are the tops of the stitches that are no longer stretching as much. So it prohibits the stretch ability of it. So this is why for me, see, this one is stiffer. I do really prefer using this method. And, you know, if you want to make your brim a bit thicker to give it some more definition, I just think it's the way to go. But totally up to you. It's your preference. So I hope that you've enjoyed kind of delving into these and that these give you some options, okay? So the 4 options are, when you start from the bottom up, you have a slip stitch band, or a single crochet band. So you would start with a chain and then work your way back and forth to create your circumference. Or if you're working a hat from the top down, you can add your ribbing at the end with either a front post and a regular stitch alternation, or a front post and a back post alternation. Now, if you guys know of any other methods that maybe I haven't mentioned, please do let me know. These also do work fabulous for blanket projects. So if you come to the end of working a blanket and you want to add a border that just has a simple ribbing, this works really great too, between the front posts and the alternating front and back posts. Fantastic. You can also use this method, the slip stitch method, or the single crochet method into the back loops only, but it's worked slightly different. And this is like option number 5, I'm going to show you guys as something that maybe you could do if you wanted to add this to a blanket. Sometimes I've seen people add this to hats when they worked it from the top down and at the last minute they decided this is the ribbing they want to do. But more often than not, I see this method used in blanket projects. So I'm going to show you how you're going to take this method and attach it to the end of a blanket. Okay guys, so I just have this little swatch that I made here for something else, and we're just going to pretend that this is a mini version of a blanket. So I'm just going to leave this out here. And I'm going to use this color here just to kind of show you the difference. So we're just going to ignore this. I just don't want to cut the tail off because I don't have much left over. But so we're going to just introduce this color here just so that you can see the difference. So let's say that you've done this blanket project, and actually maybe you do want to have a different color for the border. So all you're going to do is you're going to find the very first stitch in your corner here, and you're going to pull that through and chain to secure. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create the same idea. I'm going to use the slip stitch method in this case here. So here I chain 10, let's chain 10. So we have 2, so that's already going to count as 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Actually, I'm going to only chain 7. I'm just going to make it kind of proportion to this. So You can chain any number of chains for this. By the way, if it's a blanket, you can make your ribbing pretty thick if you like, or you can make it pretty narrow. So I'm just going to chain 7. Now I'm going to work my way back using the slip stitch method. So I'm going to skip into the 2nd stitch, and I'm going to slip stitch. Then I'm going to go into the next one. So I know if I had 7 chains, I have to have 6 stitches at the end. So there's 2, there's 3, keeping it nice and relaxed. There's 4, 5, and here's my 6th one. Okay, so I have 6 stitches. So I've worked my way back to the blanket. Okay, so now what I want to do is I slip stitch into this next stitch here. So what this does is it anchors the end here. So I slip stitch. It anchors this to the end here. So what have we done? We've done a chain row, which came from the very first stitch, and then we slip stitched back to the 2nd stitch. So row 1 was the chain, row 2 was the slip stitch back. Essentially a chain is a slip stitch. And so we're basically working, each row gets worked into each stitch. So if that was row number 2, then row number 3 has to begin in the 3rd stitch. So we would then slip stitch up into the next stitch. That helps us get ready for the next row. And then you have to turn your work a little bit. We start working into, so you don't want to work into the sides where you slip stitched. You want to work into the first of the 6 stitches. So we have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, we have 5, and we have 6. Just going to help that along there. Okay, so then I turn again. And so you'll have some little loops here, but don't let that throw you off. So we've just done the 3rd row. So now we're going to chain 1. Oops. So you do have to turn your work a little bit. So you chain 1, then you work your 4th row back towards the 4th stitch. Okay, so we work 1 and 2, just tightly, and then 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So you always have 6 stitches being worked before you get to the 4th row. Okay, so that's 6 stitches. So now this stitch has already been worked. So this is the 4th row, so it's going to go into the 4th stitch. And you slip stitch. But now we're going to work row number 5. So we're going to go up to the 5th stitch and slip stitch. Then you turn your work and you find that 1st stitch again. So you always skip the 2 slip stitches that you worked into the side of your work, and you find that 1st stitch and you work your way back just like that. This is the 5th one, and this is the 6th stitch. Okay, so now you can see that it's creating a little bit of a ribbed effect. Now here's the thing that I should have mentioned this at the beginning. When you're using the slip stitch to create your ribbing, you actually should be doing 2 rows per stitch, because you see here we were working, I think I was working the half double crochet slip stitch, so you can see that on that side. So it's going to create a bit of a thicker width here. Now when you're using slip stitches, as you can see, it's bunching in. So what's going to happen is your work is going to kind of bunch in like that. So I'm going to show you what the best thing to do is when you're working slip stitches. So you're going to work your way back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what I would do is slip stitch back into the stitch you went out on. So I'm going to slip stitch back there. Okay, so when we're doing the slip stitch ribbing, I would do 2 rows into every stitch. So basically the chain out and the chaining coming back in is the same stitch. Then I would go up to the next stitch and work my way back. Okay, now let's talk about if you wanted to use the single crochet method, which you're really not going to have this situation happen as much. So I'm just going to continue from here. And I'm going to work single crochets. So I'm just going to move this over here and into the back loops only. I'm going to work a single crochet. So we're working the same ideas that we did when we were just starting with the ribbing on its own. In this case, we are using a row that's going to work into, we're creating a sideways row out of an edge of a crocheted project here. So there's 5 and there's 6. Okay, so I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. So you can already see the stitch is sitting higher. Okay, so when I come back around, I'm going to single crochet 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so the ribbing is much wider in this case. So when I finish this row, so I went out on row, I think it was row 5. So I went out on this stitch, and when I come back, this is where I'm going to slip stitch to the next stitch, because this is where that row ends. So you see how it sits a little bit more flush. And now when I start row number 7, I go up to the 7th stitch. Oops, I go up through there, slip stitch. So that gives me the height to then move across to the next side. Sorry, I've got all these tails in the way here. So I'm going to do that again so you can see. So I just turn my work, and then I skip these 2 slip stitches, and I always work into my main 6 stitches, or whatever your stitch count is. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so now when I turn my work here, you can see that the single crochets actually sit beautifully coming out of each stitch. So the height of a single crochet will usually work very well if you just want to work across, coming in, and then slip stitch to the next row. You will then work across, you will come back, slip stitch to that, because that's the row you worked, then slip stitch up to the next row, work that across, chain 1, turn, come back the following row, and then slip stitch to the next stitch up. So you keep working up. So that is sometimes a preferred method for blanket edges, because people find it a little bit easier to deal with single crochets. But the slip stitches work beautifully as well. You would just have to work 2 rows into the same stitch. So you chain out and you chain back into the same row before you move up, or into the same stitch before you move up into the next stitch. Then you slip stitch out, slip stitch back, and finish in that same stitch. Then move your way up, out, back, up, out, back, up. So I hope that makes sense. So essentially, see, so if this were your blanket and then you're creating a ribbing, okay? Essentially, you just want to keep in mind that for slip stitching, you're going to use 2 rows per stitch. For single crochet rows, you would just use 1 row per stitch and back. This method is a little bit tedious, I can tell you, if you're a beginner, because you kind of have to pay attention to what stitch you're using, where you came back, where you just slip stitched into, and the number of stitches you have. So if you're super, super new, definitely give this a shot, practice it a lot. It's just that it's going to take you, I think, a little bit to get the hang of it. Once you do, it's no problem whatsoever. I think that always starting with this method, like even if you're working on a blanket, I would actually start with the ribbing first and then work the body of your blanket. Most people for blanket borders do not generally use ribbing on average, I would say. But if you want to kind of test your skill a little bit, this one would definitely be a good one to do so. I know people are also going to ask me, well, how do I make my way around a corner here using that? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to work single crochet rows until I get to the end here, and then I'll show you really quickly that little bonus piece of info as well. Okay, so I'm just working up to the end of my last row here. And I've got the last stitch, so I've slip stitched into the last stitch. And there you can see that the single crochet row ended up quite nicely. If I was doing the slip stitch, I would be doing the second row into the same stitch. Okay, so the common question is, well, how do I come around the bend now? So whenever we work around corners, there's usually kind of this general rule of threes. Like you would work 3 stitches into the same corner here. That way it helps, the amount of stitches will fan out and it helps you round the bend here. Now, depending on how high your stitch is, like in this case, I have a height of 6 stitches. So I may need 3, I may need 5 rows. So here's what you would do. So you would just turn your work and start by working your way back across. So notice I didn't slip stitch anywhere else. I slip stitched to the end of this row, and then I just continued back the way I came. So now I'm technically working a second row coming out of that same corner stitch. Okay, so there is the 6th. And then of course I chain 1 and turn and make my way back. So this would now be a 3rd row heading back towards that same stitch. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so you can see already that I've worked beyond kind of this edge here. So I would slip stitch again back into that same stitch. So I've now got 3 rows that have been worked out of that same stitch. So you can see it's still not quite enough to merit coming around. So I'm going to work my way back. So this would be a 4th row. So I would just turn my work. I don't chain 1. And I would single crochet across. So this is row number 4. Okay. And now I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to come back across. This is going to be row number 5. So this is my 5th row going back into that same area. Okay, and there's my 6th stitch there. Don't miss out on that one. So this is now where I would assess the situation. So it's definitely coming up. Now let's see, I'm going to go back into that same area and slip stitch. And now you can see how it's fanning out. So I'm definitely going to work another row going back. So the only thing is you have to watch is that this is going to stretch a little bit. See that? So I've worked 5 rows, or 4 we'll say. We're going to work the 5th row now into the 1st stitch of this side of this row here. Just like that. There we go. So now you can see, let me just bring this up here. Where there was a huge gap before, there is no gap. So when you come back for that 5th row, now it again depends on the length of your ribbing. You may need to do 7 rows. So whatever that odd number row is, that's when you would go into the next stitch. So 5 I found for blankets is generally a good number, but you might need 7. So in the 5th row, I've gone into the next stitch already, which is already into the row below. And now I'm just going to work my way back just like I did before. So now this is row 1 of the new stitch that I've worked into. Okay. And there 6. Now I chain 1 and I turn. And now I work a second row going back. And this is 5, and this is 6. And then I assess the situation here, just like that. So then I would slip stitch back into that first. So then I would slip stitch back into this stitch that I did previously. Okay, so I've worked 2 rows. You can definitely see how it's turning. I'm going to stay in that same stitch, and I'm going to work a 3rd row coming back. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, and now I'm going to chain 1, turn, and come a 4th row coming back. Okay, so 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I'm going to slip stitch back into that same stitch. Okay, and now I think I'm getting closer. So see how it's eventually, so the goal is I eventually want it to sit more upright. Yeah, so you do have to play around with this. I'm going to tell you right off the bat. So some people would give you a formula. Oh, you're going to work 5 rows into this stitch, 5 rows into the next stitch. But it also depends on the yarn weight that you're using, the hook size you're using, your gauge. So I don't always like to kind of talk in absolutes of anything. If anything, my goal with my channel, whenever I give crochet lessons as opposed to the tutorials, I like to give you guys the theory behind things and the tools so that you can kind of figure it out and gauge for yourself. So I am going to do, actually, I feel okay going into the next stitch. So I'm going to go into the next stitch to slip stitch. So I'm going to take this one out. And I'm going to go into the next stitch here, which is the next row down. So you're working into the sides of rows here. So just go to where it feels comfortable. I'm going to slip stitch there. And from there, I'm going to turn my work, and I'm going to work a row out and a row back in. Okay, so the first stitch I worked kind of 4 rows, and then on the 5th row I moved to the next stitch, and then this row I work 3 rows, and then in the 4th row I moved to the next stitch, if that makes any sense. So I slip stitched into the next stitch. So this one I'm working 2 rows here into the same, maybe, we'll see. So when I get here, so I've worked 1 row out and 1 row down. Look at that. See how it's starting to straighten out? So I feel pretty confident now actually slip stitching into the next row. And when you're working into the sides of rows, you've got to just eyeball and see what you think. So now you can see that it's beautifully fanned around. It's starting to straighten out. So now I've worked into the next row, and I'm actually getting super excited about this color combination, oddly enough. And I want to see how it turns out here. So we're working back across. This part is ending up being a little longer than I thought it was going to be for this crochet lesson here, but I think many of you are going to find this pretty interesting. So I wanted to kind of take the time and work it out. So now I'm going to come back, same thing. And now I think we're back on track to just slip stitching into the next row up and continuing on our merry way here. So we have that. Okay, so I'm at the end. So now I'm going to go into the next stitch, which is the end of the next row. I'm going to just try and pick up an extra loop there. I'm going to slip stitch, and then I would slip stitch into the next one to begin the next row. Okay, and then I'm going to turn. And so whenever you slip stitch up, you always skip those 2 and you work your main stitches. So in my case, it's 6 stitches. Okay. 5 and 6. Okay, so let's put this down. Let's see what happened. Look at that. So look at how we did that ribbing. We came around the bend here and came up, and now you can see that it's nice and flush. Woohoo! This is actually giving me some inspiration on a project. So for blanket border ribbings, this is how you would do it, and I would actually recommend the single crochet back loops only method. It's much easier to get them to sit in the sides, and then of course you're just going to work extra rounds into each of this last stitch and then the next stitch over. And so you just keep gauging and keep collecting back into the same stitch. So I basically did 5 rows before I shifted to the next stitch when I came around that corner, and then I did another 3 rows. So it's looking like it's going to take you a total of 8 or 9 rows before you finally kind of get back to being straight across again. Now, do I think that the slip stitch method would also look good? Absolutely. You just have to remember that with the slip stitch method, you're going to use 2 rows into every single stitch, as opposed to the single crochet row that just basically fits nicely into each row. So it's totally up to you. And that is how you would use the ribbing method for a blanket border. Now it will look a little different on the back, so you can see where the slip stitching happened, but it's still nice and tidy and will still look very, very pretty. So guys, I know this little bonus portion ended up being a little longer than I anticipated, but I hope that you find this super, super valuable. And like I said, if there are other methods of ribbing that I have not covered that you would like to share with us, please do leave it for me in the comment box down below. Also, if you have any questions, as always, do not feel shy to drop that for me in the comment box down below. And if any of our crochet friends happens to see the question and can answer it before I've had a chance to, please feel free to do so. We're all here to help each other out, give each other a little bit of inspo, and I'm super, super happy when I see that. So make sure to do that. And as always, if you prefer to email me directly, I know some of you do, you can send me an email at info@crochetcrafty.com. And I always recommend you attach a photo of your work so I can have a little look at it and see what's happening there. And in fact, I know a few of you have sent me attachments and things on Facebook, which is great. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at The Stitch Sessions, so make sure you tag me, and you can also get in touch with me there. I do check my emails probably a lot more often as opposed to my DMs, or actually even probably Instagram I would check a bit more often. So if I haven't gotten to you right away, please don't fret. I will get to you eventually. It just takes me a while to sift through everything. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, guys. I am really looking forward to next week's project, which is we're back to our hat series in our crochet series this year for 2025. And it's going to be the hat for the month of March, which you saw a little sneak peek to. And I will be using one of these ribbing method techniques, which you will see. All right, guys, I have yapped long enough. I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope you enjoy working on these types of ribbings. Happy crocheting. Take really good care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in next week's session. Bye-bye.